Hello, all y'all out there in Radio Land. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Well, it's that very special time of the week where we come onto your radio dial and we dig underneath the muck and, basically look at all the pastures around with all of the bison. There's a thick layer of this. It's excrement. We dig underneath that. Once we do that, we get to the bedrock. What's the bedrock? Well, the bedrock is that stuff that the mainstream media will not talk to you about. It is the stuff that the establishment does not want you to know about. And after we've dug up all of that good knowledge, those good facts, we look back and recognize how we've dug underneath the BS. It is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. We come on here every Wednesday from 6 to 8 to talk about politics, radical organizing, activism at the local, state, national, and international level. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. So I wanted to start this. This is actually some hot breaking news just published by the Detroit Free Press about 2 hours ago. And it's an old friend of ours. An old friend. Hey guys, remember the 90s? You know, Boy Meets World. Yeah, the Backstreet Boys. And when John Engler absolutely gutted public infrastructure up to and including and especially mental health services in the state of Michigan. That one I'm particularly sore about because that's the field I happen to work in. But John Engler, for those of you who have been quite following a lot of the fallout post Larry Nassar, he was the interim president at Michigan State University. Was being the operative word, because as of this afternoon, he has decided to resign. And I'm just gonna go ahead. And, actually, first of all, I'm going to play a little bit of a video here so y'all can listen in and understand. First I'll play and then I'll give a little bit of context.
George, you know me! All the pet water? Shame on you! Do something! Make a real statement! Engler, my daughter said you had triplets! You had triplets! Mom, he has daughters! He's gonna make a difference! Actions speak louder than words, Engler! Do you not have a conscience? Don't apologize now, it's too late!
Ferguson, get
Your
him
true
out!
colors have shown!
Ferguson, I know you can hear me. Get him out.
Joe, you should be disappointed. You have a granddaughter. What if that was your granddaughter?
What if it was your daughter,
Don't
Ferguson?
you have a conscience? I taught your grandkids. All right. You have no conscience. Don't tell me all right, Engler.
You're a coward.
My 15-year-old is watching you.
So that was at a Michigan State board meeting. Engler was chair. That the mother you heard, that was Leslie Miller, and that was the video basically shows there's a whole group of protesters in green shirts, most of whom are survivors of Larry Nassar and their parents, basically firing back at Engler during this public meeting. Again, kudos to them for going out and making some noise to protest against that sort of injustice in person. Hold on just a sec. I am going to go let in my lovely co-host. I'll be right back. are back. Just got joined by my co-host, who's getting situated as we speak. So, as I was saying, protesters came. They made some noise and some ruckus against John Engler. And for those who maybe don't understand the full context of this, I'm going to go ahead and read from the article. Again, this was published in the Detroit Free Press about 3 hours ago. Or around noon. So, updated at 3 p.m. So, yes, about 3 hours ago. It was written by David Jesse.
Breaking news.
So, long story short, John Engler will resign as the MSU interim president. And a little more detail about it. The Michigan State Board of Trustees has asked John Engler to resign before it fires him tomorrow morning. Sources close to Engler told the Free Press on Wednesday. The board has scheduled an emergency 8 a.m. board meeting for Thursday. Sources said at least 5 board members are prepared to vote to fire Engler. So that was basically, the writing was already on the wall. They had basically decided, we're going to fire Engler. And they asked for his resignation beforehand, which apparently will be forthcoming. So as it goes on, it's a meeting that has been brewing almost since the day Engler took over as interim president at his alma mater, stepping in for Lou Anna Simon. Simon resigned under heavy criticism and is now facing criminal charges, all tied to her response to the Larry Nassar scandal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Just one after another.
Yeah.
See, I think what's most shocking about this story is how long it took to finally get rid of Engler in the first place, after this scandal was breaking through, you know?
And for those who don't know, Engler he's just said awful stuff since he became the interim president. And basically, he seems to me like the worst possible, well, I guess you could pick worse people, but one of the worst choices you could make in the wake of a sexual abuse scandal, like what was going on with Larry Nassar. There's a guy who most recently he described the survivors of Larry Nassar as he told the Detroit News editorial board that they were quote unquote enjoying the spotlight while the university is trying to go back to work. So it's like a backhanded criticism that he's basically saying they're seeking attention. God, I'm sorry. I just thought about that. That's horrible. God, no wonder this guy is getting fired.
This guy was the governor of our state for a while.
He certainly was. Remember the 90s?
Oh, nothing was wrong in the 90s. All the shows were good.
Oh, yeah. Lovely Engler's cover. I actually made a joke about that at the top of the program. It's like, if you liked Boy Meets World and horrific cuts to our mental health budget, you might be you might have grown up in Michigan in the 90s. Anyway, a letter was sent. 23 of MSU's top academic administrators, mostly deans of various colleges and schools, signed a letter sent Wednesday to the board demanding that Engler be replaced. The pattern of comments by interim President Engler, including his most recent statement suggesting that some of the survivors of sexual abuse are quote-unquote enjoying the spotlight, further harms the very people it is our responsibility to support. We do not support his continued leadership. Going back to there was a response by Betsy Riley, who's a grad student with in the Reclaim MSU group. He was a known entity. He was a conscious choice by the board to play defense. They say trust us. We can't trust them. This is the group that brought us Engler. And they went on to say that the group would like the board to engage various groups around campus in the search for an interim president. Because, I think the choice of John Engler, beyond just all of the terrible optics and just awful statements made in the wake of Nassar and how he just continued to mishandle that for the university. It should also be stated that the choice for interim president, nobody, like the actual student body wasn't really consulted. It was made entirely by the board, the very same board that had really fallen asleep at the wheel during the Larry Nassar scandal. And keep in mind, like the actual, again, the survivors and the local groups that facilitated the protests that really brought Larry Nassar down, they were not consulted about who the interim president should be.
Also consider that the board had to have known at least on some level what was going on with the whole Nassar scandal, because you don't have that sort of that crazy widespread amount of sexual abuse without enough people being complicit in it.
There have been a lot of discussions about it took a web of complicity to keep this guy out of prison for as long as he was, to keep him from being taken to account. And, while the former MSU president is facing criminal proceedings, it's almost as if, she's got, and other people discuss this too, she's being made into kind of the primary target / scapegoat, when really, while yes, she's definitely responsible for that and should be brought to trial, she wasn't the only one willfully ignoring the abuse of these gymnastics athletes at the hands of this pedophilic monster that they had under their employ.
I think that's most of what I have to say about this. I mean, good news that Engler's finally gone. Amazing that we're hearing about this just 3 hours ago. It took long enough, I'll say that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, the rest of... So, I guess we'll move on from that topic. We don't have a whole lot of local coverage this week. We will be... I believe near the end of the show, we will be having an interview with one of the organizers of the Grand Rapids Women's March. Is that still on?
Oh,
Nora?
yeah, it's still
on. All right,
on.
dope. All right. And, I guess we'll talk a little bit about this, just the Women's March here in Kalamazoo, or lack thereof. And so this upcoming weekend is when a lot of the national women's marches are going on. And this year is a little bit different. So, not just in Kalamazoo, but a lot of other cities have decided
to cancel their women's marches?
To cancel their women's marches. Yeah, sorry, I was multitasking and I got a brain fart there. I
think an example of that, is that the one kind of like what happened with the one in Northern California, how it was overwhelmingly white, so they just decided to cancel rather than actually reaching out to communities of color to, have a more representative women's march? Yes,
exactly. And here in Kalamazoo, that was a big criticism, especially last year. There were some really bad takes by the people organizing the women's march here. And frankly, people who hadn't really been involved in the social justice or activist community in Kalamazoo, the organizers of last year's Kalamazoo Women's March, I didn't recognize any of them. I was like, who? I'm not sure who these people are exactly. And as much criticism as we do give to Pro-KZoo, justifiably, they were on point and raising a lot of these structural issues with the women's march. And it's is it really a women's march, or is it a white liberal women's march? Because let's be clear. A lot of the criticism of the Women's March has been that it has this very, very specific racial and ideological character. It's a lot of the people who show up are women who are maybe white, middle-aged, have more kind of centrist liberal politics. Not people who you would consider particularly radical. And, there's that, and, this might sound hurtful, but a lot of the people who show up, and, there's no criticism without a grain of truth. What exactly are they doing for the rest of the year? Is it, how many of the people were showing up to these marches with their pink hats and, having some brunch afterwards, and then, spend the rest of their year maybe the extent of their activism is sharing, Trump cartoons on Facebook or speaking to various managers.
I mean, I guess I've noticed some of those save activists would occasionally like host like little get-togethers to call representatives. Like, I don't even see those terribly often. Like, I was kind of concentrated more towards like the beginning of the year, shortly after.
Yeah. One thing I will give as kind of a prop to the last Women's March we did is it was very focused on the midterms. A lot. They didn't have.
That was the case across the country.
That was the case across the country, and I think last year they didn't actually have any speakers last year, did they?
No, they didn't. I think part of their reasoning was that they were the same organizers behind the Science March prior to that, and they did try to bring on speakers, and they did bring on speakers for the Science March, but like either they had a really hard time getting people who actually wanted to show up as speakers, and when they interviewed people about it afterwards, they didn't really like as much the fact that there was the short speeches, and they would have rather just marched. Which I think part of that is because they had them speak at the beginning rather than the end, which maybe I don't necessarily agree with, but or maybe that is the better way to go about it. Who knows? But like I think they were just kind of going off of previous engagements they did. That previous engagement they did, but even so, there's a lot of room for improvement. Although it does beg the question, like, why don't we try to make the March for Science and other similar actions like that, the People's Climate March, more intersectional in ways, Like, why does that get reserved for the Women's March? Perhaps because it's less radical? I don't know. But that's just a question that's crossing my mind right now.
Yeah, and I think it is also a space that has allowed more radical organizers to interact with people they might not necessarily always interact with in everyday life. For example, when you have a lot of people who are maybe like kind of in the center, or they get all of their politics from like CNN or MSNBC. It is a space for them to hear, interact with people who maybe are in grassroots movements day to day, or who have a more kind of radical political analysis. I feel like, there's kind of a lost opportunity to do more with that. Granted, we did talk a little bit a few weeks ago about how this 2019 March got canceled. There was some behind the scenes minutia that I am not actually privy to, but I think a lot of it had to do with the issues we've been discussing. But, I do think it is kind of a lost opportunity to kind of expose people to more radical perspectives. In that vein, there are other events going on. I wanted to talk a little bit about something going on in Detroit, because I thought this was particularly interesting. So there is going to be a day-long event at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit. Phoebe Hops, she's the president and founder of Women's March Michigan. And yeah, they're taking a decidedly different tactic or approach to the Women's March that I thought was worth discussing. Said we're doing some workshops in the morning with a rally outside, and following up afterward with some more workshops, some learning, conversations, and things of that nature. We're also working on a lot of community action as well. While there won't be marching necessarily, our presence will be felt in the city that day. I feel like we're at the point where movement building and conversations are so important, more important than marching around. First workshop starts at 9 a.m. at the Charles H. Wright Museum. That's 315 East Warren Avenue, Detroit. Rally is planned for 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. in the plaza outside the museum, and the closing workshops are from 1:30 to 3 p.m. One of the workshops we're doing is called On the Trail, which is bringing in people who have won and lost their campaigns and talking about what it takes to run for office, fueling people up to get ready to run in 2020. Speakers include Rashida Tlaib, Brenda Lawrence, Andy Levin, Stephanie Chang, and Abdul El Said. So
props.
What they're doing in Detroit, that's bomb. I love that. And granted, I've talked on the show before. My politics are pretty radical left. Throw some Marxism in there and whatnot. But at the very least, it is stepping up. It is talking about, it isn't just this kind of performative marching. It's focusing on, like, how do we continue this energy, this momentum, and teach people how to organize. I love that. The idea that they're doing these workshops and you're going to have, like, these really seasoned political activists. And, both Abdul and Rashida are pretty about as radical as you can get inside the frame of electoral politics.
Oh, yeah.
So... I think like that is a really good step in the right direction. So big props to the organizers over in Detroit for kind of this different, more novel approach to the march. Because, this is year 3. We're going on the Women's March. And I feel like they've really taken in the criticisms of the Women's March and also really thought out in a very clever and movement building sort of way. Like, what is the next step? What do you do beyond these giant women's marches? How do you take those women, those people who show up to this march, and organize them politically? Any more thoughts? Well, do you have more thoughts on that, Nora? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that on that note, it is a really positive thing. I'm interested to see more of it, and I think it does also kind of do like assess more the negative reputation of the Women's March organizationally and in practice as not being intersectional enough or not actually doing enough for people in like really direct ways. Because like people do still see the Women's March both organizationally and in practice as like sort of like a white women's thing. But don't forget this organization was founded and still is run like mostly by women of color. Like
Linda Sarsour.
Linda Sarsour is probably the most notable example. Now, I mean, I hope this works. I like to see more of it. The organizer in Grand Rapids has very much been focusing on that in particular, and we may actually get to talk with her around 7. Actually.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Keep that topic in your mind. We're gonna bounce around to a couple other things, but we will be returning to the Women's March. Set around 7, you said? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, dope. All right, so with that, you know what? It's about 6:25. Why don't we take a quick little break, and then we will hop on. We've got a lot to talk about on the show today. The first ostensibly progressive candidate has announced for 2020. Granted, there's going to be some discussion to go around that, because anybody who's been paying attention knows that it's... there have been some issues raised, issues that really need to be discussed. We also want to give you some updates about... hold on. Where is it? We've got some really important updates about, we've got the strike going on over in L.A., the Attorney General, the new Attorney General guy that is... What manner of swamp monster do we have this time? And much, much more. So, keep your dial locked. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, your only source for political revolution.
You need music. We need to inflate our ridiculous egos. 89.1 FM, WIDR. We'll get along fine.
Hey there, Rider listeners. Know what's even cooler than supporting Radio Evolution? Driving safe in the winter.
So listen to Zia's tips.
If you want to drive safe, Keep a safe distance from other drivers. If you find yourself sliding out of control, turn into the skid to regain control of the vehicle. And if visibility is low, go slow. Don't be afraid to go under the speed limit if you have to. Last but not least, stay warm and keep extra blankets in your trunk or back seat in case of emergency. This has been a friendly reminder from Wider.
Hello, y'all. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, talking about them politics and geopolitical rumblings and what have you. And speaking of which, yeah, let's go across the pond for this next one. That was terrible. I usually do. Yeah, that was more Irish than anything. I usually do a much better British accent. Sorry, So, Nora, you sent us a thing about Brexit, and there have been some important updates. It's we've got some very interesting things going on. They still have not really figured out a way to go about it. That is pulling the UK out of the EU. There's a chance that it might be going to a second referendum, and it's been. You have a potential vote of no confidence against Theresa May herself.
A second time in like a couple months, which is remarkable.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So like I watched on Democracy Now! This guy break it down, and like I think like the main points to take home here are the fact that there was like almost twice as many members of the House of Commons that voted against the Brexit deal than for it, as it stands, and the reason why Theresa May's government exists in the first place is to get through this deal, to like actually push through this Brexit deal after the previous conservative Tory PM had to resign in shame after trying to push back against it. Now, what could happen with this vote of no confidence is the fact that, like, I guess the far right fringes of her own party and with like the other far right parties in the UK. Like are voting against this Brexit deal because essentially it keeps too many of the rules within that they would have like had whether they stayed in the EU, and it's not satisfactory to them. But they can't get rid of Theresa May as Prime Minister, otherwise they risk the very real and very likely possibility of Corbyn becoming the next PM.
That's true. I did want to talk about like tactically, Corbyn has been making some noise because, yeah, if you know something were to happen to Theresa May, it would be very likely that Corbyn could actually step up and become the new PM.
Oh yeah, there's almost no option in these negotiations that wouldn't lead into some sort of new election that would be harmful for the Tories. And I guess it's hard to explain specifically in a way that might like translate to the American political system, but that's the long and short of what like will probably happen leading up to this. Mm-hmm. And I think the possibility of not having a Brexit is very real, but I think another thing that Corbyn might be trying to pull off is getting on the ballot a less corporate-friendly Brexit as an option versus a Remain option.
Yeah, and I think it is really interesting to explain to people who, if you're not really versed in European politics, they actually do these things called special elections, which is like if the prime minister or president is doing a bad enough job, they will actually hold an election.
What? Yeah, they don't just replace them with basically a different version of the same guy?
Yeah, it's like here in America, you just have to wait 2 years for another bad president. Yeah. But no, it is exciting stuff. And so I have heard, too, like they might actually bring it to basically vote again on the referendum itself, like bring it to a second vote with the people, a second referendum. And just out of curiosity, you think like if the UK were to have to vote on it again, would they still vote to Brexit? Which, I mean, it's a very pertinent question, and if we see it play out, it will have interesting implications for us here in the States because, you know, our Brexit basically happened in the form of electing a reality TV star president. So, yeah, if it were to go to another referendum and get voted down, it would have interesting implications for us here in the States because we've got the 2020 presidential election coming up. And it'd be interesting to see how a similar population, demographically reacts to, you know, their kind of nativist political movements, and if it would have if we would see something similar in 2020 with the ousting of Trump and his administration.
Yeah, and I think that's the most I have to say about this topic in particular. I mean, I'm interested to see where it goes. I do hope that we do indeed see another election in the UK as a result of this. Like, because I seriously doubt that the people of the UK would vote to, you know, approve with the Brexit deal, like with May's Brexit deal as it stands, because like it's so unpopular already, even within her own government, like and party, that. You really think that like the common people are gonna like get on board for that? I seriously doubt it. Like she's being laughed at in Parliament.
Yeah, pretty much. It is important to note that it's not just left-wing or non-Tory opposition. She is getting a lot of criticism from her own party as well. All right, so I guess let's go ahead and move on to the next thing, and I believe. What we wanted to talk about, was... Actually, I lost my place. What did we want to talk about?
Why don't we... I can't believe I'm saying this. Why don't we talk about who's announcing for 2020 again?
Yes. Well, okay. So, interesting developments in the last week or so.
Interesting indeed.
Yes. So... you know, we mentioned at the top of the hour, like, so the first ostensible progressive has officially announced, and I know everybody is doing that whole, not everybody, but a lot of people are still waiting on that, like, I just imagine it as like, you know, like, they're waiting on it like you wait for, like, that OP character from Smash Brothers. It's going to be the next challenger approaching. It's Bernie Sanders. So with that, though, one of New Deal Grandpa's key allies from 2016 has entered the race, Tulsi Gabbard. And, you know, honestly, I think there's a lot to unpack and go into with this. First things first, a lot of people reacted by saying, Tulsi who? I think there's something that, you know, needs to be understood is that there is people who've been involved in the progressive movement for a long time. And by a long time, I'm going back to 2015, you know, the Bernie campaign. And people who follow politics, but not quite that close. So I think a lot of people overestimate Tulsi Gabbard's inherent star power or just how well known she is. Because I think that there's a lot of progressives who still can't get over like the narrative power of 2016. You know, it's very Tolkien-esque, you know, like. Or maybe Game of Thrones, I guess, might be a better idea. It's like there's just so much drama, and like she'd stepped down from the DNC to hold by her principles. And you remember that moment at the Democratic National Convention when she was the only Democrat who said, "I vote for Bernard Sanders." You know, cue like some orchestral music or something. But yeah, for most of America, they're just like, oh, another president from Hawaii? Is that what we're talking about? Okay, so a lot of stuff has come up, though, because, and even at the time, I remember 2016, a lot of people kind of went goo goo gaga because she stepped out. And, you know, not to emphasize, that was a very, I don't want to say ballsy. It took a lot of ovaries to step up and buck the establishment Democrats. When, as we especially know in hindsight, everybody was in the tank for Hillary. However, that does not mean that Tulsi Gabbard has progressive policies, but is she perfect? No. And I guess we want to talk about a couple of things that have come up since she announced. So there, and we'll be recommending actually a couple of articles to you by the time we're done talking about this, because this is like a more complicated, nuanced topic. We're not going to tell you at the end of this that like, oh, she's perfect and it's all a bunch of establishment smears, or the opposite. It is a little bit more complicated than that. So what we have with Tulsi Gabbard is, unlike, for example, Mr. Bernard Sanders, she has not always been on the right side of history when it comes to certain issues. And actually, I don't know, Nora, do you want to lead off? Because
I think probably the most significant examples I've seen circulating social media are her past her past statements that, like, you know, are positions that have been like Islamophobic or queerphobic. Now, I think like a lot of what was really formative for her, like personally, like at least as far as, you know, her statements go, was her service of military like in the Iraq War. And she used to be like a conservative in the vein of her father, who started out as like a local politician in Honolulu. Now, after that, like she claims that that fighting in the Middle East made her realize how much that government shouldn't interfere in the lives of people's like sexualities and stuff like that, like compared to what you might see in some majority Islamic countries that have horribly punitive punishments to queer people. Mm-hmm. But it at the same time, like we're kind of at a time where we do need the government to interfere to protect us from discrimination in housing and employment. Like, that's serious, like across the board. Like, still the majority of states in the country don't have these kind of protections. Now, I think, like, I'm trying to think of, like, she previously took money from the Coalition for Traditional Marriage and called pro-gay rights activists like homosexual extremists, all that awful stuff. Yeah. And to be fair, she's since like co-sponsored multiple like really important pro-LGBT acts in the House. And I've like asked myself, like, okay, like this past record of homophobia is pretty damning, but what would it take for me to move past that? Well, I would say that she has to be like really doing significant work in order to show that she's really gonna put herself out there for my community. Does co-sponsoring several different bills, I'd see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at least right in front of me. Is that enough? Maybe. I'd like to see her write one herself, and that's rather comprehensive. But as far as the Islamophobia stuff goes, she seems to blame too much of the problem with terrorism on Islam itself, and not quite in the way that like someone like Donald Trump or Steve Bannon would, but it still but like the way she like frames these views still gets the approval of a lot of white nationalist leaders in a strange way that, like, even if she's also tried to cover up on these in really in like really concrete ways, sponsoring bills that would fight Islamophobia, stuff like that. It's still a concerning part of her record and what she might actually believe, considering how intertwined Islamophobia is with Western imperialism in the 21st century, and the war on terror and the continued reproduction of terror as an immediate byproduct of that.
Yeah, I want to pull up a quote that, like, I found this fairly alarming, and I think it's a good example of this. And this is from this is actually quoted from an article in the Jerusalem Post, because one of the issues that I was really concerned about, because we talk about her her past reactionary views when it came to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and non-binary folks. The Israel stuff is a lot more current, and so is the potential Islamophobia. This is actually from as recently as June 2016. And she was asked on CNN about Obama's refusal to use terms like radical Islamic terror. And she said, it's important that you identify your enemy, you know who they are, you call them by their name, and you understand the ideology that's driving them. So, yeah, I think that ties into what you said about, blaming too much of it on Islam itself rather than... Because here's why it's fairly disappointing, because what you will be seeing in the coming months is she's definitely going to have the most... the best, the most nuanced understanding of foreign policy of anybody who's going to run, and is the only one who's going to be running overtly as an anti-interventionist. But, from statements like that, they don't speak to somebody who understands holistically why Islamic extremism is such a problem in that part of the world. When, granted, we do know that, she understands that to a certain extent. The Stop Arming Terrorists Act that
she wrote herself
has a keen understanding of, CIA is, giving all this stuff to Islamic extremists. But even that, I feel like she's not going that extra step. She's not saying, this is the cause of it. It's she said, we should stop supporting this. But at the same time, that you have to come and understand, it's we are actively creating that problem. It's not just that we just suddenly started giving them weapons. It's because it is a decades-old strategy that the American military-industrial complex has engaged in. Not to mention the geopolitical reasons that Islamic extremism even has a foothold in that area of the world in the first place, which again has a lot to do with CIA coups, Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. And also, when we talk about Israel... I'm sorry, go ahead, Nora.
So to kind of tie it together, I think something interesting is how, I guess her history with queerphobia and Islamophobia is kind of tied in a way, because, she became more sympathetic to people like me because she was afraid of people like those she might have shot, Mm-hmm. And I guess another thing that I find significant about things that she's said in the past is that she's still in favor of quote-unquote fighting terrorists, but doesn't want any the sort of interventionist regime change style wars that you might be seeing. You might have seen Libya or what's arguably going on right now in Syria, all that kind of stuff. Now, to fight against terrorists, so to speak, still means doing the sort of targeted drone bombing sort of thing that we've been doing, which still disproportionately will hit civilians and children and cost trillions of dollars out of our budget. Even if it doesn't send American troops back home in caskets, it's sending a lot of other people back home in caskets if they can find their body parts. And
it's interesting because we were having this conversation a couple weeks ago about Trump's troop withdrawals, and it does make me wonder as her position evolves, as we get to learn more about what her foreign policy platform actually is. Is that going to be the extent of it? Is that going to be, is it going to be peace for us and more war for them? Because, that was our criticism of, the troop withdrawals overall, is we're still going to be slaughtering lots and lots of innocent people over in that region of the world. Now, yeah, if your peace, the peace that you're selling just means peace of mind for people at home, that you're not going to have American lives on the front line, then that is a false peace. That does not get to the root of solving problems involved with terrorism and with the fact of the matter is terrorism is created when we create collateral damage, and that's certainly not going to stop. Just because we don't actually have boots on the ground.
Yeah, and automated warfare has shown to actually increase extremism. And even if you did want to look at it from a selfish sort of nationalistic perspective, even if it's not American lives on the ground, it's still American taxpayer dollars into these expensive drones. Like, I would not be able to sleep well at night with that either.
Yeah.
And a quote that she gave the Hawaii Tribune and Herald just last year was, in short, when it comes to war against terrorists, she's a hawk, but when it comes to counterproductive wars of regime change, she's a dove, which kind of summarizes a lot of her foreign policy. Although she does also have like money and personal ties to Sheldon Adelson, who is known particularly as like a Republican lobbyist who is especially hawkish when it comes to Israel-Palestine. He definitely wants to just step on Palestinians and all that. So, which is essential to, you know, if that we ever see a resolution within our lifetimes to that conflict, essential to what might be a Middle East peace. But if she's still like friendly with him, that seems unlikely.
Oh yeah, and I did also want to point out, you know, as much as because like I do want to underscore when we actually get to debate time, for those of us who are against endless war, there will be a bit of like, oh my gosh, somebody actually talking some sense up there. But again, you got to pay really close attention to like what the implications of our actual foreign policy are going to be. Not to mention, you know, I think the biggest thing we want to harp on is like, yeah, her policies are progressive, but her hands are not clean. She even like in the past has taken money from a lot of the defense contractors that she may soon ostensibly be criticizing. Maybe we'll see how her actual like peace platform pans out, but we're talking about money in the score of like about in 2016. That's pretty recently. This is, you know, the election cycle that put her on the map with progressives. She took $63,500 from the defense sector. That includes about 10 grand from Boeing and Lockheed Martin's political action committees. And Gillibrand's Off the Sidelines PAC donated another 10 grand in 2016 as well. Excuse me. And even going back a little bit further, according to FEC data, about 20 grand of her money came from business PACs like Raytheon and the New York Life Insurance Company. Now, it is important to point out that I think thus far all of the candidates who've announced said they are not going to be taking corporate PAC money, which is a good step forward. Even I'm not again, I'm more for revolution than reform, but at the same time, it is a step in the right direction. Tulsi Gabbard is not a dove. I think a lot of the things we're going to hear from her are going to seem a lot more sane as far as foreign policy goes compared to the other candidates. I
think a lot of her domestic policy is going to be a lot more sane. Like, she voted against PAYGO. She's been for single payer and free college for a long time. She, of course, did the right thing during the 2016 primary. I feel like we've said just a bunch of bad things about her, but considering the other two people who declared their run for the presidency, we could do a lot worse. Kristen
Gillibrand, who became a progressive last Tuesday or something. The guy from Julian something. The guy with such low name recognition that I can't remember his name for the...
Julian Castro, was it?
Julian Casablancas. No.
Oh my God. Okay, so...
Castro, yes.
So I guess, finish the topic on Tulsi specifically. She's been a lot better than most other members of the Democratic Party for a long time. She still has, a lot of problems with the record. But some of them are pretty common to the problems that we've seen with other progressive members of Congress. For example, Bernie Sanders also supports the similar sort of drone program to fight terrorism.
Yeah, he does.
And
don't forget
Tulsi
that.
Gabbard and Bernie Sanders voted for Sesta Fosta. And but I think something else that was good about her was that she really she also protested for Standing Rock, and she supported reinstating Glass-Steagall as well as a few other things. But I'd still not feel too dirty about voting for her if she was the choice in the general.
Yeah. As of right now, she is the best candidate Am I going too far when I say that, Nora?
I don't know if I'd put her ahead or behind Bernie Sanders in my choice.
I mean, he hasn't announced yet, so let's just assume let's assume that he's not in the mix. But
we all know at least 5 people who are definitely gonna announce within the next couple of months.
Yeah,
But
keep in mind, Kamala Harris is a cop. Kirsten Gillibrand became progressive last week.
Cory Booker's a phony.
Cory Booker is a phony. Julian Castro doesn't have any name recognition. And what's funny is I almost wish Julian wasn't running, just because I think it would have been hilarious to have Joe Biden be the only man running for president. So it would just be a bunch of female candidates and then creepy Uncle Joe talking. It's I'm gonna hug you inappropriately and condescend to millennials and
oh my god. I would not vote for Joe Biden. I'll tell that much.
No.
So with Kristen, she used to be a pretty ranking member of one of the blue dog type Democrats for a while. I mean, she just succeeded Hillary Clinton after she became Secretary of State in New York Senate. And I'm trying to think of other specifically egregious things that she's done, but basically she's about as phony as Cory Booker or Kamala Harris is. And as for Julian, I don't know if I can say a lot specifically on his record, but I know that he was in charge of HUD during part of the Obama years. But also keep in mind, when Obama still was still parts of those crucial decisions to bail out the banks after the financial crisis, which kicked people out of their homes. So tell that to the people in his HUD department.
Yep. So, just one last thing with Tulsi Gabbard. Do your research. Definitely want y'all to make up your own minds on this. And I wanted to cite a few articles that y'all can look up as a kind of a good starting place. So Jacobin last year put out an article. It's called Tulsi Gabbard is Not Your Friend. And then there's an article on Medium that's a rebuttal to that called Tulsi Gabbard is Your Friend. And then
it's not too hard to figure out.
Some of the financial stuff that I was just talking about, I cited from an article on Open Secrets. That article title is Lengthy History with PACs Follows Tulsi Gabbard into 2020. That's by Raymond Ark. It was published on January 14th. Again, that's at opensecrets.org. And then on Reddit, you can find an article refuting anti-Tulsi propaganda. Again, I think it's a good idea to look at both sides of this criticism. And, we talked about it on the show, and God, this is just the start of the presidential primary season, so we'll probably be talking about it again. Oh, I'm already so over all of this, especially...
I have good / mixed feelings about Tulsi announcing. I'm still worried about too many progressives splitting delegate votes amongst each other. But that's another discussion that we'll certainly go back to later.
Yeah, there's this is another thing I'll talk about just real quick, and I might have one of my dim enter friends on to see if this is actually possible. But I did hear something about how there is a potential strategy for if the progressives basically pledge their delegates to whichever progressive is the front runner at the convention, and I don't know, it's a bunch of delegate math stuff. I don't know, but that's a bit farther out there. And real quick, we didn't mention anything about Elizabeth Warren. As far as her progressive domestic policy goes, it used to be pretty solid, but then she's kind of flaked a bit on issues like Medicare for all, and when it comes to foreign policy, she's basically where most of the establishment Democrats and Republicans are at in the whole bipartisan war consensus. So, that's that, and all right, I think with that, let's go ahead and take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we're going to have a guest on, talk about the Women's March in Grand Rapids. Y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
This is Scott from Dr. Dog, and you're listening to 89.1 Wider.
There's a hole in the roof, and the rain's coming down.
Stay tuned for Wider's weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo.
A Moment of Magic WMU is a chapter of national nonprofit that offers creative programming to children with pediatric cancer and other medical vulnerabilities. They operate on the mission of believing in magic at a time when a child needs to just be a kid and reminding them to be brave, strong, and fearless. The most popular service they offer to make this magic happen is providing character visits with the world's most famous fairy tale characters. If you are an undergraduate college student and interested in joining, meetings happen on Thursdays from 7 to 8:30 p.m. in room 105 to 107 of the Bernhard Center. Their social media is AMOMWMU, and their email is AMOMWMU@gmail.com for more information.
This has been our weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo. For more information on how to spotlight your RSO, head to WIDRFM.org.
Hello, y'all. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So we are now joined by Raina Cook, and she is one of the organizers of the Women's March up in Grand Rapids. Hello, Raina. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Again, thank you for taking time to come on to the show. But first of all, could you just maybe introduce yourself to the folks at home and explain how you got involved with organizing this year's Grand Rapids Women's March?
Sure. So basically, I am just a single mom in Grand Rapids, and I'm overwhelmed, and I have enough on my plate. But when I saw that there wasn't anything going on in Grand Rapids yet, I just kind of thought that it would be a great time for us to get going again on showing our Grand Rapids spirit with the Women's March. And so I decided to take that on, and I haven't regretted it too much yet. But we've got a lot of really great speakers lined up and everything. So I'm really looking forward to this event, and I'm hoping that we get a really good turnout.
Oh, fantastic. So, you know, that's interesting you mentioned that, like, there wasn't really anything organized as it. Was there a march in 2018 or 17? Or
well, last year there was not a women's march in Grand Rapids. There was actually, I was present at a march for the J20 defendants that still had pending charges at that time.
Oh, thank you very much for being part of that.
Oh, I think I met you there.
We did a little solidarity march, and that's what I was doing last year. So this year we wanted to kick it up a notch and hopefully get a wider audience so that we could talk about some serious issues that we've got work to do in.
So we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the issues that have come up with women's marches across the country, concerns that they're not quite intersectional enough, this perception that it's a lot very kind of white feminist sort of events. I was just curious, is that either one, like a criticism that you've heard, and if so, how have y'all been trying to address that? Specifically up in Grand Rapids?
Sure. So that's definitely a criticism that I've heard and one that I was concerned about. Marching underneath the Women's March banner does two things. One, gives you a really large audience of people who are familiar with what's going on, and makes it so that they see the event and want to go to the event because they know that it's probably going to be something kind of big. The other thing that it does, though, is it has a stigma attached to it that this is a white women's feminist movement, and it really is it struggles in the areas of intersectionality. So in Grand Rapids, we really wanted to make this a little bit of a different march. So what we are focusing on is definitely intersectionality, and trying to hand the mic to folks who, are marginalized and maybe don't have an opportunity to speak their truth about what feminism it looks like to them in their personal lives and in their communities, and maybe how we aren't doing so well in some areas and how we can do better. So our main focus is to highlight some of those areas where we can do better as a community. And we're looking more on a local level, like right in the Grand Rapids area. We aren't having any politician speakers, and we aren't going to have any huge names at this march. What we will have, though, is everyday women who have experiences that they'd like to share with what it means to them to be a woman and to be a feminist, and what we all can do to make that a better community and make that circle of people held accountable to a higher standard than what we previously have been.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. I really like that, not having politician speakers and instead having ordinary women to talk about these sort of issues. It's very important, and I think that's a really interesting and clever way to go about it. Can you talk a bit about the people who are going to speak? Anything that we can expect to hear from them?
Sure. So we have some really great speakers. We have from Movimiento Cosecha, we have someone speaking on immigrants' rights and what it means to be a woman in the immigrant community. So that will be really important because we in Grand Rapids have been fighting against the Kent County Sheriff's Department and the contract with ICE that allows them to detain prisoners longer if they are wanted by ICE. And so that's going to be something that definitely will be talked about, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about. We also have folks that will be talking about public health. We have a couple of speakers from the Red Project in Grand Rapids, which deals with HIV and the AIDS epidemic and keeping people healthy and trying to stop the spread of those diseases. We also have some folks that are going to be there from Healthy Homes, and they are talking about the 49507 area code, which has incredibly high levels of lead in the water, and what that means for the children in that area and the parents that are raising those children. We have a Jewish speaker, which we felt was very important considering there had been allegations of anti-Semitism within the National Women's March, within the leadership there. And so we wanted to make sure we gave a voice to our Jewish community. We have someone who will be speaking on women in the workplace, who is a union worker, and we also have somebody who will be reading a letter of solidarity from a local ATU union here in Grand Rapids. Let's see, what else do we have? I'm trying to go through my list in my head, and we have a couple of performers, actually. We have someone who will be performing a song, and someone who is going to be performing a spoken word poetry piece. So I'm really looking forward to that, kind of break up the just speaking and have a little bit of fun and, creativity in there as well. We do have somebody who will be speaking on sexual assault and how that impacts women in the community, and what we need to know that we can, the work that needs to happen so we can move forward and help heal that, that terrible thing that affects so many women. Let's see, we have a sex worker who will be speaking as well, which is really important because that is one of the groups that is often overlooked and left out of the conversation in feminist circles. And so we really wanted to make sure we gave a voice to sex workers, and so they can talk about FOSTA and SESTA and how that impacts the way women are able to function in the sex work industry. So, that's just some of the folks that we're going to be having come out, and I think it's going to be a really dynamic group of women, and we really hope that they can connect with other folks in the community and try to point out where we can move on and do some better work. And we also will be having organizations that will be at the march with their materials to pass out so people can figure out who these groups are in Grand Rapids and who they can connect with to get out in the community and do some local work.
That sounds really fantastic, and I like how you tied it to a couple of local issues like bad water in some of the areas. Like that does sound, all too widespread in different towns across Michigan. Now,
Right.
Is there any other, significant local, Grand Rapids or Kent County, or perhaps even West Michigan in general issues that you're trying to bring up more at this march?
Well, I'm kind of leaving that to the speakers, quite honestly. I'm just one person, and I ended up organizing a lot more of this than I thought I would. So I really didn't want this to be flavored by what I thought people needed to speak on. I wanted to give people the chance to use their own voices and without much lead, and just kind of talk about what was important to them, and make it not about me in any way, shape, or form, but about them and their own experiences and opinions about what we can be doing differently.
I just did want to say, so much sincerely, so much kudos to you for really taking on the responsibility and doing the work. And in particular, it's amazing how all the things that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, those historic critiques of the Women's March, it really seems like y'all up in GR have really internalized those issues and really turned it around into something that kind of addresses all of those and really makes it into something powerful. So I did want to ask, so we talked a little bit about kind of the how they're approaching it in Detroit. Are they going to be organizing workshops and things like that? To what extent, it sounded like you said there are going to be groups on the ground. Is there going to be a kind of a similar call for continued organizing and action? And how do you hope that kind of plays into the Women's March up in Grand Rapids?
Well, I really hope that the call to action will be a local one here. I really think that is very important to highlight, that this is a very grassroots march. This is going to be just really basically about the community and what we can do as citizens besides just going out and voting. That has been a primary focus in a lot of the women's marches, and there is not that focus now because we don't have anything to do as far as voting goes. And while it is important to get out and vote if that's what you choose to do, there is so much more that can be done, and we really wanted to highlight how it's not just a get out once a year and march or get out a few times a year and vote. It's really about finding the people in your community that are already doing work and trying to lend your energy, your money, your time to those people. And really, that's where we can affect a huge change, and I believe a bigger change. And personal relationship building is super important. And so really hoping that this is a really strong communal event for Grand Rapids, where people can get to know each other and be pointed in the right direction to continue doing local work.
Okay, well, again, I really want to thank you for coming on and taking your time to talk with us. Nora, before we kind of wrap things up and let Raina get back to the good work, did you have any other questions that you wanted to ask?
I have two statements and also a question. First off, for anyone that's interested in going or helping out with this, you can find the event on Facebook at Women's March Grand Rapids 2019, hosted by Women's March Michigan. And there's also a GoFundMe for the Grand Rapids Women's March 2019. That's what you search for to find it on GoFundMe. And I guess I was looking on the discussion on the event page, and it saw it was talking about, I guess, alternatives to the so-called pink pussy hats. Now, what do you,
Sure.
How do you plan on going about that for this march?
Well, quite honestly, that's something that I don't feel like I have a whole lot of power over one way or the other. I do have an opinion on that. And I will tell you that my opinion is that the pink pussy hat is not really a very good statement of who we are as women, or should be as women. As people of color and trans women have said that can be a very, it's not a great symbol for inclusivity and intersectionality. So my suggestion is leave the pink pussy hat at home. Not shaming people who have worn them or feel like they want to wear them. If that's what you want to do, fine. Just be aware that symbol has been seen as not so inclusive to some groups. The alternative that some folks are planning on using is the royal blue for the blue wave. As someone who does not necessarily align myself as a Democrat, I'm not going to say that that's my favorite thing either, but one thing that I think would be cool would be to see people in purple, because purple is a traditional color of feminism, and that would be neat to see. But whatever people wear, they just need to be warm. It's January.
Yeah.
So come in.
You can't please everyone with your hat choice. Don't freeze your ears off.
No, just come and be warm, and wear what you're comfortable wearing. Just be aware of what those symbols can mean to other folks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. Andy, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to close out by asking, so folks at home, and again, there is not going to be a local march here in Kalamazoo. If they want to make it up to Grand Rapids, when and where should they go to get to the Women's March?
Yeah, that's pretty important, isn't it? I almost forgot about that. Yeah, so the rally will be held at Calder Plaza, and that will be starting at 1 p.m. There will be speakers and a march to follow. Depending on how time goes and how cold it is, we may break up the speakers and do a march in between the two halves of speakers to get people's blood flowing and warm up a little bit. So we're kind of playing that by ear, but plan on the event taking at least 2 hours with the march and the rally, and possibly a little bit longer. So what's going to happen for the march is that we are going to go through the downtown area and loop back to Calder Plaza so that people will be nearby their cars again, and also to finish out the speaking if we haven't done that yet. So I really hope to see everyone out there, and the more people we get, the warmer we can be, and the louder our voices can be.
Oh, great. Well, again, thank you so much for taking this on. You know, me and Nora have done our fair share of grassroots organizing and know that like it can be stressful and a lot of work. So thank you for putting in the time.
Well, and thank you both.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, great. And again, Nora, it was Grand Rapids Women's March.org.
No, this is the Grand Rapids Women's March 2019. You can look it up on Facebook. Events or GoFundMe.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Raina.
Thanks so much. All right, thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Excuse me. So, with that, again, big thanks to... Oh, that's... Hold on. Oh, okay. Is that coming from more than one source? That's really weird.
We're experiencing some technical difficulties.
No, it's... No, okay, that is creepy, because I don't know where is that music coming from? Oh, my gosh. All right, so creepy music aside, I don't know where it's coming from. All right, so all right, so oh, that was coming from my phone. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Oh, by the way, big props to Boron Nuzzle. I've been featuring their music on the program for the duration, except that last bit we just played during Raina's interview was Sid Redland, so who's also part of Boron Nuzzle. By the way, just in general, if you are a local musician and you'd like your music featured on the program, just hit us up. We're always in search of new background music that is not have some copyright to infringe upon, because that's there's the new rules there. So, excuse me. So I did want to mention something real quick about the Women's March. So. It was about when was it? Back in September. There's this band I know of. They wrote a song called "Pink Hats Won't Kill the Beast." It was this this rap group called Systemista, and they performed this song back in December. And then all of a sudden, I noticed the Women's March. They're not wearing the pink hats, and they're doing like radical organizing, as it said in the song. And like, I'm just gonna say, is it a coincidence? Yes, probably, but it is. No, my rapping and was talking about what's happening, but it probably did not in any way influence that. I just thought I'd be cheeky for a second there. Okay, so I don't know, Nora, do you want to like maybe take an early break and then hit up some new topics? All right, y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Wider is. Wider is.
I ain't getting out of bed today. 9 to 5 to survive. There's gotta be a better way than waking up.
Wider is. Wider is.
Living lonely is a life that I've been living.
Wider is. Wider is Radio Evolution.
It may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Hey y'all, we're back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So we have a very important correction, first of all. So when we spoke earlier about how the Women's March got quote-unquote canceled, we forgot to mention there is a comparable event that has been set up in its place, and thank you, Nora, for catching this. Something I forgot about. When we talk about the original event, as it was going to be planned, got canceled by the original organizers who were organizing it. However, some other groups have stepped up to organize it instead. In particular, the Kalamazoo Alliance for Equality, the Planned Parenthood Advocates of Michigan, JABS, which is Justice Against Bullying, run by our dear friend Gwendolyn Hooker up on the north side, Rise Kalamazoo, and CARES. And that's going to be at 2 p.m. on Saturday at Bronson Park.
I believe Outfront is involved as well.
Oh, yeah, I believe so, yes.
It is worth mentioning that JABS and like a couple other organizations involved, are mostly run by non-white people, and
yes.
That Rise Kalamazoo, however, does take from a lot of the same people who organized the previous Women's March and the Science March before that. So take with that what you will, but there is still a sort of Women's March happening here in our good city of Kalamazoo.
Yep, and
it's just not officially sponsored by Women's March Michigan or national.
Yeah, and it does sound like they are, and, especially we know some of these organizers personally, so it seems to speak to them trying to be more intersectional, and I'll read off a little bit. It's hosted, here's all the organizations who are involved. It's hosted by Kalamazoo Alliance for Equality, Rise Kalamazoo, Justice Against Bullying, Outfront Kalamazoo, correct? CARES, El Concilio, Planned Parenthood, Student Progressives, the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, Psychotherapy Consortium of Southwest Michigan, Brumley & Co. Hair Studio, Boheme Tribal Belly Dance, and Choices for Change Counseling Agency. And here I'm just going to read their statement real quick. We, the women, the youth, and allies of the resistance, stand united against the forces of inequality, injustice, and intolerance in all its forms. We call on the people in this country to lift up the voices of the marginalized and those who speak out for the rights of others. We call on the people of this country to bring about real change to our communities and to utilize our politics for lasting benefit to our country and the world. We call on the people of this country to realize our full power by using our voice at the ballot box in every single election. Again, there will be a Women's March type event here in Kalamazoo at Bronson Park Saturday at 2:00, and hosted by some pretty good local organizers.
Oh yeah.
Yep. All right, so moving on from that, we want to do an update on the shutdown, showdown is dragging on. It is currently the longest government shutdown in American history. There are moments when you think you finally adapted to the surrealness of President Trump. I saw this picture the other day of it was the banquet room in the White House covered in fast food. And I'm like, this has to be Photoshop, right? This isn't a real thing. He served McDonald's and Wendy's to it was a championship Super Bowl team, right? It was
no wonder they didn't show up to the White House.
Oh my God! Yeah.
So that's what happens in the shutdown. You don't have the budget for anything more than Mickey D's.
So the ostensible reasoning is that the government was shut down, so we don't have like catering in the White House. So like Trump made a big deal. It's like, I bought out of my own pocket. I got all of these Big Macs and got. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I just like. A president who thinks because he eats fast food himself, so he gets like, I'm gonna cater to regular folks. They'll love Big Macs. It's like he might this is a championship football team. They have money. They're used to eating probably better food than McDonald's. yeah. And
also, that's to stay fit. Like you really think you're gonna catch them there? Like that'd be a scandal.
Yeah, he's a billionaire president. He can shell out for a little bit more than some frickin' chicken snack wraps from Wendy's.
I mean, maybe he's a billionaire now, but like he's a high millionaire at most. Let's not get into this. The point is the government shut down.
Show us his tax returns so we can know whether or not he can afford more than Big Macs.
Hey, maybe we will. But maybe thankfully we're still getting all our tax returns, but like the IRS is still like underfunded to a point where rich people who cheat on their taxes can still get away with it. Like parts of the government like the EPA and the FDA aren't able to enforce regulations that protect people from stuff like not getting food poisoning. There was a guy who snuck a loaded pistol into an airplane in Atlanta. I think domestic violence shelters are having to close because of this.
Here's another outrageous story I heard related to the shutdown. Steve Mnuchin had a meeting with several top banks. Steve Mnuchin is the financial. I'm having a brain fart, Nora. The Treasury Secretary.
Treasury Secretary.
And they asked him to. With banks that do mortgage lending, they need to process applications through the IRS. It's part of the just general process, and because of the shutdown, they haven't been able to do that. So the banks came to Steve Mnuchin and asked, "Can you make these very specific and particular IRS processors? Can you deem them as essential personnel?" And they did. So let's be frank. There's nobody to clean up our national parks. TSA agents aren't getting paid. However, the mortgage companies can have specific IRS personnel who, by the way, and here's a more outrageous thing, they are getting paid. They are getting paid to do this. They're getting paid to process mortgage claims for big, gigantic mortgage companies. However, we can't even pay our own TSA agents or, all our national parks people are still furloughed.
Joshua trees are getting cut down.
Trees are getting cut down.
Those will get replaced for hundreds of years. There's trash all over our national parks now. People are driving their cars through them. It's just so egregious. People who have to live off HUD assistance are going to get kicked out of their homes. And what also concerns me about all this is, with the Steve Mnuchin stuff, especially, in relation to, people getting kicked out of their homes for other reasons with HUD and, not getting their government paychecks.
And as we talked a little bit about...
how much of this is part of the plan of the establishment? How many people do they want to get kicked out of their homes so they could gentrify somewhere else? How many more people are they trying to put into these for-profit jails? How many...
If you want to be really cynical, like, this is almost... You could almost interpret this as, like, Trump playing up his base by, like, saying it's like... Because, we brought up on the last episode how a lot of people's food stamps and WIC has been cut off. And how much of that is saying it's like, those welfare queens don't deserve it in the first place. Except probably, if you're like in the state of Michigan, this has happened in a lot of red states, they'll get those waivers. So, the food stamps will process to poor rural white people, but not for people who are poor but not whites in major metropolitan areas. I can't remember if that passed here in Michigan or not.
No, that's something for the healthcare thing that with Medicaid work requirements, which didn't quite. It passed in Michigan, but not in the same way.
I'm getting my issues conflated.
It is a good example, and I would not be surprised at all if similar stuff happened in other states. In fact, that's probably another way to be able to continue to gentrify cities.
And
now,
sorry. Well, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's a decent amount, a very small but decent amount of Republicans in Congress who are kind of on board for this government shutdown because they're the Tea Party types who just hate any part of the government that actually helps people, never mind continued funding of police, prisons, surveillance, drone bombing, etc. But are just finding out what the government actually does in term that they claim to hate so much. However, two recent bills that nearly passed the Congress were blocked twice by Mitch McConnell, signaling that it's not just Trump that's trying to push this government shutdown. So it's gotta be the establishment's trying to make a few quick bucks off of a lack of federal regulations, etc. in the wake of the government not operating. However, it seems a little bit less likely now that Trump will try to declare a state of emergency to build the wall.
That is good. Yep.
Because
he has backed down from that.
He's backed down a little bit from it, and now he's kind of taking maybe I will, maybe I won't. But that makes it less likely to even less likely to hold up in court because an emergency isn't a is it or isn't it kind of situation. You know what I'm saying? If your arm's cut off. You don't think about, maybe my arm is or isn't cut off. Maybe I'll go to the hospital.
Yeah.
But and also the fact that there's verifiably less crime happening from immigrants, etc. Immigration's gone down. Legal immigration is much more likely than illegal immigration. It's all a bunch of BS. This whole wall
I do need to take some time and look up some of these alternative facts because there are certain people I know who swear up and down that just these gangs are way more violent than you understand, and those are fake statistics. Look at these real statistics I got from probably some right-wing think tank.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to a couple things I really do want to bring up because in my own conversations with folks, I think there's this idea that the longer the shutdown goes, the worse it looks for Trump. I hate to be the cynic or the bearer of bad news, but I don't really think that's how it's playing out politically. Here's what I'm seeing. You have that Tea Party base.
Yeah.
That they want the government to be shut down. They hate the government. They don't especially if they have enough privilege, they really do not care. As a matter of fact, they're cheering it on. They're like, yeah, keep it shut down longer, And then for the rest of the people who don't want the government to be shut down, Trump, to his base and the people that listen to his base, he has effectively flipped it and been like, this is the Democrats' fault. This is the reason that the government is shut down is because they won't negotiate with me on my wall. And even some centrist media has actually taken that talking point and who was it? Was it the Washington Post that put that article out that it takes two to tango or it was one of those establishment rags put it out. And let's be really clear about this, whether you like the government shut down or not, or whether you like Trump or you don't. No, him and Mitch McConnell are the two main actual reasons that the government is still shut down, because you know what? The Democrats, they're offering all of this Orwellian border security that is actually more effective than a freaking stupid wall.
Yeah,
You know?
and they keep on touting their solutions to a government shutdown by like Nancy and Chuck when they awkwardly shared that podium together in their response speech.
They look like the American Gothic painting. It's really
they look like
weird.
your mom and dad who are mad at you after coming home too late.
Yeah.
So they said oh, look at us, we passed these bills that were previously approved by Republicans. It's a good point that there's no reason he should be shutting down the government now. But they should actually fight for stuff that actually helps people rather than just copy pasting what this in bed with fascist party has been trying to do.
Because if you listen to what the Democrats, the mainstream Democrats, are actually saying, they're like, look, we've got all these surveillance drones that we're going to put along the border, and we're going to give ICE even more tools. And it's like, where a few months ago you telling us vote for harm reduction, the Democrats who are going to rein in ICE, and the whole part, the subtext of these negotiations are, we will give you as much of a draconian surveillance state as you would like on the border. We just don't want the wall. And if it were any other president, I would say that he was doing this tactically to get increased border security, but Trump's got his own ego problem, so I think he really just is not going to give up till he gets his stupid wall funding. But you're going to have Mitch McConnell's going to have to be the one who caves in, or the Democrats, because Democrats historically cave. They do. I guess they envision some I guess they think their base is just that those white liberals in the suburbs who at some point are going to start saying, you really should be the adults in the room and just give him the wall, because the government people need to get paid. They do. The TSA people were playing some profane songs at the airport, and if they were still getting a paycheck, maybe I wouldn't have to hear a Tupac song.
Oh my God,
that was a real story, by the way. JFK, they were.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, JFK, the TSA agents were blasting uncensored rap music.
Oh, good.
Through the PA speakers.
That sounds like it'd make my TSA check a lot more tolerable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, to be serious, the TSA agents, you want to make a real statement, walk out. But,
a lot of them are calling in sick.
A lot of them are calling in sick, but, if you feel like an obligation to do your job, that is a next. I guess that's a good next step. Start blasting that Outkast and that Tupac and all that stuff. But yeah, just that's kind of the reality where we're at with the shutdown right now. And again, it's just gonna keep getting worse as it drags on. I don't think I had much else to say about it. Nora, did you have?
I have a couple of things to say, the national emergency thing, it's unlikely to happen, but keep in mind we still have 31 different national emergencies that have been in effect for years. One of them is as old as 1979, and several from each president since Bill Clinton as well. It's
1979. Is that the emergency?
That was one emergency by Jimmy Carter in response to Iran with the hostage crisis.
Yeah, I was going to make a joke about how neoliberalism is an emergency, and that started around the 70s. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, there's not any remaining active states of emergency between the presidencies of Carter and Clinton, but there's a lot of them. It mostly results to terrorism, Middle East, yeah, but I guess with the wall specifically, and thankfully, and there also has been 1, 2, 3 since Trump. One of them being related to the opioid epidemic, and another being related to the Rohingya crisis. So he hasn't used it so far to do a bunch of really horrible stuff beyond what the U.S. government has been doing since the Bush and Obama years. But do be watchful on this, because he's not getting the money from GoFundMe, because that I don't think we've mentioned that on the show yet, but
We've talked about it privately, but
first of all, it's like really horrible and egregious that people would put their hard-earned money to like build this monument to stupidity rather than helping the thousands of people around the world that desperately need.
Oh, including, by the way,
resources.
12 grand from. Oh man, I'll have to look deep into the thread through this. But there was
this
a business,
dude from Holland, Michigan. He literally works for wall maintenance, which is ironic. And he said specifically he's not even trying to get a contract out of it, but he just really wants this wall that he's convinced is going to keep out all the scary people he doesn't like. Yeah. But basically, that fundraiser went short and had to refund a bunch of people money. Which is on one hand is haha, eat it, but on the other hand is I guess even if I did think to just scam people who wanted a wall, I couldn't have done that and just tried to run away with it. That wouldn't have worked.
And I did want to talk a little bit about the minutia of, or I guess the nuance in this of why they had to refund it. You can't, so you can donate money to the federal government. There's a process for that, but legally there is no way you can't donate money to the government for a specific project unless you live in Kalamazoo. We live in a dictatorship of capital. Anyway.
We should build a wall to keep out the Ohioans.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, foundation for excellent. Let's build an excellent wall to keep out all these people in Ohio probably want to come up for our legal weed. But anyway, by the way, that business from Holland was Fortress Stabilization Systems, which the company's owner, Ed Wheatley, what I recommended people do is... you can't really change reactionaries' minds like this, and we don't really live in Holland. We can't really patronize his business anyway, but
if you know someone from Holland, which we're in West Michigan, there's a good chance you do, tell them to not get their wall fixed up there.
And I would flood him with some letters and stuff about just suggestions of anything else he could have donated that money to that. Well, he's going to get refunded, so,
it doesn't matter,
here's what you could do with 12 grand that would actually help society. Send him some ideas, folks. So the big reason that had to be refunded is you cannot donate money to the government for a specific project like that, particularly something involving national security. It's just not... Legally, you just can't. So the GoFundMe was refunded. It's actually a good thing because, for a while there was some concern that the guy who started it was basically trying to scam people. Granted, it became so high profile, it probably would have been difficult for him to do that. But yeah, you can't GoFundMe a border wall. That is not legally permissible. And all y'all reactionaries, I wonder think about what you're gonna do with your refund money. Maybe you can give it to homeless veterans. Y'all talk about that stuff all the time, and I don't see many of you actually do anything about it. So, yeah, any people who donated that wall? Ask them what they're gonna do with that money, and see if maybe they'll do it for something good.
Fingers
something
crossed.
that actually helps people. All right, and.
So I guess I have two quick hits, and then we should talk about the new swamp monster that Trump's trying to fill Jeff Sessions' seat with. Mm-hmm. Now, a federal judge ordered the Trump administration to remove the question about citizenship on the 2020 census, which is, first of all, not supposed to have anything to do with citizenship. It's supposed to keep track of how many people actually live in the country, and allocates important resources like forming congressional districts, like giving different amounts of federal aid to cities and other areas. So high immigrant areas, which are include metropolitan areas, big and small, and are concentrated in areas that vote Democratic. It's hard to emphasize just how horrible the side effects would be if this citizenship question was asked on the census, which would likely lead to people terrified to fill out the census. Now, that's temporarily not going to be on there, but we're expected to hear a Supreme Court hearing later. Also, there's going to be a federal court hearing on net neutrality sometime later. I don't remember like what federal court exactly is going to be working on that, but the Jimmy Dore Show did a video on that, and it's going to happen sometime this year. So it's probably your next big chance to really like save net neutrality on the federal level with your actions, because there's one moderate judge who is basically expected to be the swing vote in this case. So give them your calls. What other quick hits? There's going to be an ICE detention center, maybe in Ionia County.
Oh, I'm glad that you brought this up.
Unless the people push back on it. But, like, they claim it's not going to be holding, like, families or children. Like, we'll see about that. But, like, it's going to be for holding people who don't have any specific criminal history, but people who are just in the country illegally. Meaning, in other words, otherwise law-abiding immigrants who really didn't do anything wrong, they're going to be detained here in the middle of nowhere, Ionia. So that's awful unless, like I said, people try to stop it. And, Los Angeles teachers, they're on strike in the second largest school district in the country.
Whoa.
And they're trying to push back against like huge threatened privatization, like oversized classes and not enough staffing. Just kind of problems that we see across the board, but like, stuff that you kind of expect to see in like poor and like low income and communities of color in Los Angeles to their schools. Because I mean, I've read about what like the LA school districts are like compared to each other at one point before, and it's pretty rough on like these teachers, and good on them for striking. I think this is the first major example of this happening in like a not red state recently.
Yeah.
And I hope we see more of it. I know that there's been like murmurs of stuff happening in like the Chicago area. We'll see. Like,
yeah, and I did want to mention that because like that's a really important point that the organizers have been bringing up, and that is really interesting about it is a lot of the waves of the teacher strikes have been in predominantly red states, but this privatization of public schools, it's been a bipartisan agenda.
Yes, it has.
Cory Booker, I know, has been dinged a lot for like stumping for charter schools, and a lot of people focus on Betsy DeVos, but in that case, it really does take two to tango, because most of the corporate Democrats who have come along have been totally okay with the privatization agenda when it comes to our public schools, and particularly California, which arguably is like the bluest state in the country. You see that vividly. This has really been a bipartisan attack on the public infrastructure of our education system. That's really all I had to say.
That's about all I had to say as well. So, who is this guy that Trump's trying to make Attorney General?
Oh, please tell us. Tell us.
First of all, I didn't even know there was a thing that was allowed. But this is the same Attorney General from George W. Bush's administration.
Oh, I thought it was George H.W.
George H.W. Yeah, George H.W.
The other one who just dropped dead.
Yeah, good riddance. The so-called distinguished statesmen who neoliberals are too can't disrespect because he's dead, because he was such a statement. Yeah.
Oh, in like 20 years when Trump dies, man, he'll be like 90 something. He just has to eat enough tasty burgers so he'll make it. But in like 20 years, I can't wait. Like the Rachel Maddow will be playing a freaking Enya song or something.
Oh Lord!
Who can say what the day?
She'll be sad because you're just making her so much money. Anyways,
really.
This guy William Barr has a history like. He was one of the people that did the blueprint for the NSA's mass phone surveillance, leading to the mass data surveillance that we see today. He was involved with the pardon of 6 Reagan officials for the Iran-Contra scandal and oversaw the opening of Guantanamo Bay. Keep in mind, this is before Guantanamo Bay was used as a torture facility per se, but it was used to indefinitely detain Haitian asylum seekers. If that sounds familiar to what's going on these days. He also openly backed mass incarceration at home and developed a secret DEA program, which, became the blueprint for the NSA collection of phone data. And like, I've heard a recent commentator on Democracy Now! Say that William Barr is very much responsible in part for the mass incarceration problem we have today, at a time when the drug war was like, was just kicking up, and like, people were starting to push back against like, the response of just throwing people into jail. He actually penned a very famous article arguing for more incarceration, and he still justifies that to this day. That on one of his interviews to the Senate, he was talking about how that it was necessary to put more people in jail for drug crimes because apparently it was easier to prove than some murder cases. Now, this it's just so gross, and knowing how much like the so-called war on drugs has been used to justify our out of control incarceration problem. Like, he's also supported like just about all of the horrible, negative reforms that Jeff Sessions has pushed across. He's said on the record multiple times he wants to like return to like Christian American values in terms of like sexuality, etc. I mean, he was involved in an administration that like allowed people to die in the AIDS HIV crisis.
Yeah.
Oof. Like, I mean, people like in the corporate media are most likely to point against his unsolicited op-ed against the Mueller investigation, and that's what disgustingly what most of the questions have been about in his Senate interviews.
Yeah, I was curious about that because what we've seen with too many of these cabinet picks is like it's all focused around. And this is our main criticism of Russiagate that we say time and time again on the show is it just sucks the oxygen out of the room. You know what? It should criminal ties to the Russian mafia and the Russian government, should those be investigated? Sure. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not always the most important issue at hand. And oftentimes, it overlooks things that are much more substantial and honestly terrifying about a cabinet pick's record,
And I think another really key part of his policies in the past is he very much believes in the expansion of executive power. And he said that he would not interfere with the Mueller investigation to the extent that he would believe that it would impede on the what he sees to be the important power of the executive. Now, if he does see it as impeding onto executive power, he might just shut it down right there. But even if he did allow it to go through all the way, there's a very good chance that whoever is in charge of the Justice Department or the Mueller investigation, that they just might not make these findings public. Now, right now, that's at the hand of Adam Schiff, the acting deputy AG, which, is uncertain whether he'd make it public even if the Mueller investigation gets, shot sometime in between its completion. We might not even know what, Robert Mueller would even find in relation to all this Russia stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't know what it is, it'd be really hard to, prosecute and convict, let alone impeach a president on it.
Yeah, really. And I mean, I think it's something, and just real quick point, I think another important reason is, even if, with the Mueller investigation, something that it has legitimately done is ferreted a lot of corruption inside the Trump administration. Now, granted, it's the kind of standard corruption you see in Washington, maybe a little bit more so just because, it's freaking Trump and his crony friends. But, yeah, impeding that would only be a bad thing because, frankly, the more criminals you can take down in this administration, the more evidence you have of, the own president's, ties to criminality can only be a good thing. All right, so I guess with that, I don't really have too many other thoughts for the program today. I think we covered a lot of ground. Again, thank y'all for listening. Real quick, let's go ahead and do the activist calendar over here. So, excuse me. coming up on Thursday. Well, for the good open mic, not necessarily always political, but there is a lot of really good radical community-based poetry. That's going to be at 7:30 p.m. tomorrow at 315 West Michigan Avenue. I believe that's at a church. On Saturday, January 19th, 9:30 a.m. over at the Wesley Center. That's 2350 Ring Road. Decreasing Youth Homelessness Through Love. That is just a real quick description. Excuse me. They are going to be talking about how 40% of homeless youth in the U.S. identify as LGBTQ. Parental rejection of their sexuality or gender is the reason they are homeless, and how that intersects with how a lot of Christian organizations make a huge difference in whether or not they choose to. It's a workshop, research done by the Family Acceptance Project. Should be very interesting. You can go to the events, find a ticket link to register. It's free, and it's sponsored by Out Proud Safe, the Faith Alliance, and Outfront Kalamazoo. Also going on that day, of course, is the 2019 Kalamazoo Women March On event at 2 p.m. at Bronson Park. If you're interested, the Socialist Party of Michigan is going to be having a video conference 2 p.m.
Is that on the same day?
It is on the same day.
Interesting. The same day as both that and the Women's March in Grand Rapids from 1 to 3, which is #official, and we just interviewed the organizer.
Yep, and then, of course, on Monday, January 21st, Martin Luther King Day, there will be a day-long teach-in over at the Bernard Center, starting at 11 a.m., going on until about 3 p.m. So, all right, I want to thank y'all for listening. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. We do upload our episodes on the YouTube after the fact. You can always catch us there. And please like us on our Facebook page. That's the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.